Good morning and welcome to another episode of Queerantine. We are really excited for this Valentine's Week episode because we have some really special guests. So, my name is Mitch. I use he, him, his pronouns. And the question of the week this week, team, is how are you going to celebrate Valentine's Day? I'm really excited because they just came out with gluten-free Oreos, and we're going to make little Oreo crust cheesecakes that are gluten-free, and I think about it every day.
Oh, that's a better plan than we have.
Yeah, that's a better plan than anyone has.
What are we doing?
Eating gluten-free Oreo cheesecake.
Okay.
I mean, I'm sold. I don't know what else we would need.
I mean, the only other thing I was going to say was we were going to do diamond dots of our pets that our lovely neighbor created for us.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. Do we have any plans?
No. I don't think so. Not yet. Now we got to make some.
Real lame.
Hi, I'm Cameron. She, hers. I'm Mitch's wife. And yeah, I mean, we're also going to make just a bunch of, we're huge Disney nerds. I don't know if he's talked about that on this before.
Oh, yeah.
Every
but
video.
we're also going to make some like park food stuff to go along with those cheesecakes and just kind of have a chill, fun night in the kitchen.
Yeah.
I
like it.
So I'm Amy. I use she, her, hers pronouns, and now I'm going to have to come up with a better date than just sitting on our couch doing diamond dots. So you'll find out on the 14th.
And I'm Sarah. Cheers. Yeah, I mean, we're going to have to bake something. Or we have to do something creative.
We got a bun pan.
We do. We got
We're
to
going to make a
bun
Valentine's
pan.
bun. I've decided it right now.
That's awesome. You got to put sprinkles on it. You got to get like
And
the
in
heart-shaped sprinkles. Yeah.
What are you, new?
Yeah.
Of course we're putting sprinkles on it.
The kind where you cut it open and it just explodes sprinkles.
Yes.
Yes.
That would be
Pinata
so fun.
buns.
Yeah.
Pinata bun. I love it.
Let's do it.
Thanks for helping us with that process.
Yeah, happy to. So I've talked about my wife before, and she is, of course, that professional baker. So when I say we are doing something, I mean, I'm going to help.
He's my sous chef.
Yeah. But the talent is here. So
I don't know. I've had the food that you've cooked before. I would say that even if you don't think you're a good baker, you're a good cook.
oh, thank you.
Yeah. He does most of the savory stuff.
Yeah.
That's what she is.
Mm-hmm.
We balance real nicely though. It's nice. So, but this week, what we wanted to do is actually interview our partners and talk about like what our relationships were like when they were first starting out, and you know, some of our memories, some of the things that we have experienced together. So, yeah, we're happy to be here. So what do I have on my first question? So Cameron, how did we meet?
So we met on OkCupid, which is a dating app. And it was just sort of, we had like you answer all sorts of questions and they use an algorithm to like match you up. And we had like a 93% match, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And I just saw his picture and he looked really cute. So I liked him and he must have thought the same about me. And then we just started messaging. And it was funny because he only had it on his computer and I had it on my phone. And at that time I was working at like 4:00 in the morning. So he would send me a message late at night when he logged onto his computer. And then I would send him a message like in the afternoon. And so for the first couple weeks, we were sending like one message a day until like finally he was like, this is ridiculous. Here's my phone number. Let's just actually text. But that was after a few weeks of just like getting to know each other and like seeing if we had like shared interests beyond like just the basic stuff and like just sort of learning more about each other and feeling comfortable enough that this was like a real person that I could actually get to know and feel comfortable giving them my phone number.
Yeah. So when we were online dating, so for myself, I had set like the safety that I was going to be very clearly queer in how I approached dating websites, because God forbid I meet someone, I like them, and then they find out about my identity and it's an issue. And so those weeks where we were ships in the night, like we talked about who we were, what our goals were, what our interests were. My specific first message to Cameron, because I messaged her first after we matched, thank you very much, and it was, you had me at Mabam Bam, because that is our both favorite podcast, my brother and me. And we've actually gotten to see them live together before. So that was really, really cool. But yeah, we did. So I was very open in my communication with her. I really did take, I think, at least a month and a half of talking like that before she got my phone number, just to keep safe. And then when we did start dating, we actually went on 8 dates before we decided that, yes, this was a thing we were going to do, all of which were in public places. And so especially that first date, I can remember we went to the Village Bakery at Eastview Mall in Victor. And at that time, I was working at Lush in Eastview Mall. And so my coworkers knew where I was, and they were like a 2-minute walk away. If something happened, I could have bolted and gone to work and been protected. Not that I had any inkling there was going to be an issue, but just to have a safety plan. So that was just kind of how we approached it.
Yeah, like my mom and my friends in the area, they always knew exactly where we were going. And we were going to pretty well-known places, as well as public places. They were public and well-known. So if something were to have happened, the people who we had as our safety people knew exactly how to get to us. Because that's one thing you just want to make sure of, is the people who you have, you let people know, so you have that safety plan in place, but then also make sure that they know exactly where they need to go just in case something happens.
Yeah, that's a super solid plan. It's really important to make sure that you're safe when you're dating, especially when you're meeting someone new, and especially in today's time where there are a lot more accessible safety plans that can be made. I think that having a safety plan and letting other people know where you are is crucial when you're first meeting someone. Also, I'm gonna apologize ahead of time while we're talking. If you hear scritching in the background, I had to put my cat in little cat gel in our bedroom because I feel like he just creates plastic out of nowhere in order to chew on it. So yeah, we're going to be dealing with that a little bit. But one of the questions that we wanted to talk about for our relationship was, when we were dating, what steps did we really take together to make sure we were safe? And even now, as we've been together and we continue to sort of travel around the country and the world where it's not COVID times.
Yeah, some of the similar things to what you guys had said, along the lines of making sure we have people that know where we are. And probably a similar amount of our first dates were all public places. We spent a lot of time at the lake, which is super public. There's always a ton of people at the lake. Even after we were at that point of, okay, we want this to be a thing. And I specifically remember sitting at the lake one day, and there's a little bridge. And so we were just sitting on the edge of the bridge with our feet dangled over. And this woman walked by, and she whispered something to the man she was with. And so I like heard her and turned around, and she saw me, and she said, "I'm sorry, I didn't want to interrupt you. You two are just too cute." And so like other people were noticing how comfortable we were with each other. But even after that, we still, the next couple dates, we made sure we're public and that we really, really trusted each other. And even, I think our first date was with some friends. Mm-hmm. And I'm a huge fan of make sure somebody knows where you are and how to find you, basically, how to get to you, whether it be in a dating relationship, or for me, if I'm meeting a new client, doesn't matter. If it's a brand new person in my life, someone knows where I am. And that continues a little longer, I think, in a relationship, because once you take that step and start going maybe to like dinner somewhere that isn't super populated, and so it snowballs from there, because you're so comfortable that you're going to start doing more and more things alone. So like once you stop doing that, and that's a good thing, you get more comfortable with each other, so you start excluding that need of having all those extra people, but it's hard to go back from that. So if you do that too early and then start feeling uncomfortable, that's a hard position to be in.
Yeah, and one of the things that we do now is because we're big travelers, and we were supposed to go to Egypt last May, and then COVID hit, and we stayed in Canandaigua. But we do a lot of traveling together, and we're both very adventurous, but we both have different cultures we're interested in seeing. So when we go to different states in this country, we make sure that we know what policies are on same-sex relationships or the LGBTQ population as a whole. We make sure that if we're going to a place that is not so warm and welcoming to LGBTQ people, we really make an educated decision on whether accessing that culture is more important than appearing to be together. And I remember, and we'll talk about this later because this is something that I value a lot about our relationship, but I remember when we were talking about going to Egypt, part of their culture is that typically women cover their hair. And you run at roughly 1 million degrees,
give or take.
Yeah. So, when we're going to Egypt in May and it's already really warm because it's a desert, and then you have to cover your hair, like you didn't want to do that.
No.
And I was just like sort of pushing it, but not really saying why. And then finally I was like, I am scared that you're going to have a target on your back because you're very tall and you have short hair and you're very androgynous presenting. And after I told you, like, I'm scared for your safety, and as the person I am in love with and want to spend my life with, I would like that to not be cut short. Then you were like, okay, now that I know why it's so important to you, like, I'm willing to do that for you. But that was a really hard discussion we had to have. We were like, are we allowed to wear shorts? Can we wear tank tops? Like, what are their policies on tattoos? Mm-hmm. So there's a lot more conscious planning when you're in a same-sex relationship. And even here in our hometowns, we had to make it clear that, like, we're going to this place because we know we're going to be accepted.
Yep.
A story that I love to tell, just personally as friends of yours, is the time that we went out for lunch and Sarah came to visit us. And what happened?
So Sarah has a truck.
A very big truck.
And one of the things that we'll do is when we see each other in public, because we're very clear about wanting to continue to, like, date forever, and like, so we always like flirt with each other and like pick each other up. And so if like I'm driving down the street or Sarah's driving down the street and we see each other because we're doing separate things, we'll honk or we'll like woo woo. Like, I'm not gonna whistle because it's gonna be really sharp, but like we'll woo at each other. And so Sarah has a very bro truck. And you and I were walking down Main Street and she drove by and wolf whistled, and I have never seen you so ready to throw hands in my life. And I was like, no, it's okay, it's Sarah. She always wolf whistles at me. And you were like, oh, thank God.
Which is also great for me because I know how protected she is when I'm not there. You were ready to just destroy whoever that was.
I'm always ready.
Yeah. Oh my God, that's so funny.
So, Cam, how do you or have you with me, and then I'll talk about the same vice versa, communicated boundaries?
So when the relationship started, we definitely had a few things that we sort of like, we literally sat down and had a conversation, like, what are some of your boundaries, before we even like really got fully into this relationship, so we would know like, this is a line that I do not cross because I don't want to make them uncomfortable. And then as things have progressed, like when things pop up, we are thankfully in a relationship where we can, like, we don't feel afraid of communicating with each other. So we are able to just sit down and have frank discussions with each other. And even something came up while we were on a walk the other day, and we literally just kept walking, but we're able to have a conversation about like, this bothers me, and I would appreciate if you didn't approach it from this angle. And we're just able to sit down and tell each other like, this is something that bothers me, and how can we make this okay for the both of us?
Yeah. So I love that, and it's certainly true, like now, that we do feel safe communicating boundaries. But I'll say for myself, that wasn't always true, not because of anything you did, but I have been in relationships where asking for what I need or setting a boundary gets a violent reaction. And so a big thing was when we first started sharing a space. So like when you were coming to my place when I was in the house, and then like when we moved in together, and there are ways that I do things that are different from how you've done things. And if I wanted to ask you to do something, my heart rate would go up, like I would get clammy because I really wasn't trying to argue or make an issue. I just like needed to communicate something to you. And I had to really like challenge myself to like do that. And so I did with little things like, you know, putting the dishes in a certain cupboard instead of another, like certain dishes or whatever. And you've always met me with respect and understanding. And if you don't agree with what I'm asking you to do, we talk it out. Yeah. And so we have gotten to that point where we can have frank conversations. One of my big boundaries in the beginning that I drew the line in the sand, like, I think by our fourth date, I said that I am not someone who likes to be kind of hidden, and I wanted to be welcomed by your family. And so if there was going to be an issue where you dating me was going to make family members of your close family uncomfortable or make you unsafe with your family, I didn't think it was a good idea that we stay together. And luckily that was not the case, but that was something that was really important to me, to be accepted and eventually loved by the family of whoever I was going to be with. And I'm very happy to report that it has in fact turned out that way.
Yeah.
So all good things. What about you guys?
Loves you.
I love your family.
So we always joke about how like our poor kids are gonna have it so hard because both of us were social workers. I still practice social work. So like when we approach like how we want to do things in our day-to-day life and how we want to like raise our children and stuff, we're always like, not from like a clinical standpoint, but a very like a very thought out, respecting each other's boundaries and emotions and discussing and allowing for education. But, that took us a hot minute to get there too. So we were raised very differently. And I was raised, I'm a cradle Catholic. So I was raised baptized Catholic as an infant, and I went to Catholic school until I graduated college. I don't practice Catholicism anymore, but it's still culturally, I'm still Catholic in a lot of ways. And so there were a lot of teachings that I had been used to abiding by that still kind of continue to affect us in a lot of ways, and not necessarily negatively, just like this is my moral or ethical boundary, or like this is where I draw the line because I feel uncomfortable because I wasn't raised expressing this openly, or whatever it is. And so it was really important from the start. And I think on our first date, or even before we decided to go on our first date, we were like, okay, these are the things that I'm willing to like acquiesce on, or these are the things that are really important to me. And, I don't want to speak for you, but luckily, like a lot of our boundaries really line up. Mm-hmm. And one of the boundaries that we did set for ourselves together to move forward is that, like, if I don't know that I need to know this about you, give me the grace to learn and to show to you that, like, the way I handle it the first time isn't going to be how I handle it once I have the education about, this backstory of yours. What do you think?
Definitely. And I definitely had a lot of learning to do at the beginning of a relationship too, as far as communication. I mean, everything, but specifically meaning communication. So there were some disagreements we had that were solely based on communication. And I would probably say 90% of them were just, I didn't know how to communicate my needs, and she didn't know how to accept the communication I was given. So that was a massive part of our relationship at the beginning, is making sure we understood how to communicate with each other. And it's gotten to the point where, so I've been in other relationships where you try to communicate your needs, and it turns into almost feeling like you're nitpicking. I don't like when you do this or that. And they seem so small because you haven't built up that communication, that understanding with each other. Whereas we have built that. So our communication's gotten to the point where she can say, I need you to close those cabinet doors because you're driving me crazy. And it isn't a nitpicking. That's literally the only thing we do that bothers each other right now. And so that's a really cool place to be because we've built that.
Yeah, and I think we're lucky in a lot of ways, having both had a social work background, because we've been to a lot of trainings that teach you what happens when boundaries aren't respected. And so one of the things that is really important to us is showing each other that respect day in and day out. And so setting boundaries and respecting boundaries has been something that we focused on from day one. And I mean, like, before we even went on a date, we were like, okay, there's a high probability that we're gonna kiss at some point. So we need to communicate when we're both going to feel like we're ready to have that first kiss, because, like, that's a moment you don't take back. And so both of us had very specific timelines in our head of what we wanted things to look like. And so that was a discussion we had before we were like, all right, we're going to meet friends and we're going to go to this restaurant and grab a couple of drinks. But I need to make it clear that, like, this is the trajectory, so that one of us, because, again, I don't want to speak for you, but, like, one of the tropes that really frustrates me in media is that, like, seizing a kiss by passion instead of asking somebody, like, can I kiss you? And so that was something that, like, we communicated from the start, was like, this is a trajectory I see myself on. How does it line up with the trajectory you see? And I think that saved us quite a bit.
Yeah, we actually did that with a lot of things, including even, like, holding hands. We would be somewhere and I would say, can I hold your hand? Because even what we were talking about before, you don't always know if you're safe. And I'm not going to speak for Amy and say, well, I feel safe, so that must mean she does. So we did that with basically everything at the very beginning.
Yeah, lots of boundary setting and lots of talks about how to respect each other's boundaries.
Yep.
I love that you touched on like the consent for even those what are considered like basic interactions. We did the same thing where I actually, and this will tie into our next question. I think the first day you ever came to my house, which was also the day you met my parents, we were in the driveway because you were leaving, and I asked you if I could kiss you, and that was our first kiss. But like I asked, we didn't just smooch on each other without consent.
It was 9 dates in.
Yeah, we'd been talking for 2 months, dating for 2 months before we even got to that point.
Yeah.
But yeah, what was meeting my family like?
It was definitely an experience. And it's nice to know your family because they are great people. I am personally just a very awkward person by nature and just uncomfortable in social situations. And so I feel like I don't always have like the most accurate read on things because I project a lot of my feelings because I am feeling so awkward. But your family has made me never feel anything but welcome. And it's just great to know the people who raised you and love you too.
Yeah. So I think the first people you met in my family were my nieces, including my niece's best friend, who is like another niece to me, and my nephew. And you brought cookies that you had made. And the girls were so obsessed with those cookies. And like on the spot, you taught them how to make them so they could make more. That's what I remember about you meeting the first members of my family, was how quickly you were like, yeah, let's do this. And they just thought the world of you. And that was before you even met my parents.
Mm.
Do you remember that?
I do.
Remember that. That was a fun day.
Listen, I could latch on to baking, and that's something I feel comfortable with, so I'll do it.
Yeah, it was great. Well, I really had the exact same experience with your family. I mean, like, they're some of my favorite people in the whole entire world. We actually have a group chat, and I think I talk to your family, my in-law family, more than I do some of my family members, just because my family aren't really texters in the same way. But especially your mom is so sweet and so kind, and like went so out of her way to like get to know me for who I was. And I was genuinely made to feel like I didn't have to put up a front or a pretense. And I was never grilled. I was asked questions, but I wasn't grilled. And that really was awesome and super helpful because, you know, I want people to get to know me. I want to get to know them. But a lot of times I think it's kind of made into this high pressure thing when it really doesn't need to be.
Yeah.
And we liked each other. And for both of our families, I think they took that and were like, okay.
Yeah. They trusted you to know when someone was the person for you.
Mm-hmm.
And I never felt attacked or anything. And I think we're both lucky to have families that are so, at least immediate families that are so accepting of like our queerness. Mm-hmm. And so the people that we're interacting with on a more consistent basis are like, it's not as big a deal to them as it is for some people. And it never mattered.
Yeah.
Like, that you were queer, and it never really mattered that I was queer because they were used to it from each other separately. So then just like adding more into it, it just wasn't a thing. Like I still remember one conversation we were having where you were sort of setting that boundary where if my family was going to have a problem with you being queer, you didn't want to like get deeper into it. And I looked at you and I was like, you're not the only queer one in this relationship. So it's not like if they're not accepting of you, then they're not accepting of me. And I don't want anything to do with that either. So it sort of...
That was a wake up moment for me. And I know we've talked about that, but I was like, okay, this is different because I've been in situations where I've been thrown under the bus for somebody else's comfort. And yeah, I very much remember that conversation. Yeah. But I mean, my grandma's your biggest fan. She loves you. She thinks you're a technological wizard.
Because I took AV cables that are colored and plugged them into one thing from another thing.
Yeah. High tech skills.
Master Cam.
Yeah.
This question makes me. Sarah, how did you meet my father?
So I feel like I was a little accidentally set up. Amy didn't mean to do this, and it was, I mean, my fault for leaving the house looking the way I was looking. I don't remember what I was doing that day, but I was dressed in more of like summer construction garb. So I had no intention, and Amy swore up and down, nobody's going to be home. I just have to stop at my parents' house to grab this thing.
He doesn't usually work from home.
And this was, obviously pre-pandemic and everything, so there was like no reason for him to be home. And so I'm wearing camo cargo shorts and a bro tank top that says guns or suns out, guns out. Like, I looked so ridiculous. And so we pull into Amy's parents' house and his car's in the driveway. And even at that point,
no.
Yeah, but even at that point, Amy's like, I mean, maybe for some reason someone picked him up for work or something. Doesn't mean he's necessarily in the house. And I was like, no, I'm not meeting your dad looking like this. He will think that I'm garbage.
And I was like, Sarah, you cannot sit in the driveway while my father is home, because if my father finds out that the person I'm potentially going on dates with sat in the driveway and refused to meet him, he will never, ever let you live that down, and he will hold it against you forever. And so we were like, which one is worse? My father not meeting you but knowing you were there, or my father meeting you looking like this?
I was like really unsure which was the better of the two evils at that point, but thankfully I decided to go in, and we had probably a half-hour conversation with me sitting there looking like that. And he never once mentioned it. I think I did. I think I said something about not wanting to have met him the first time wearing that, or so we made some joke about my shirt, but he never mentioned it. And it's just a joke now, but it would not have been a joke if I didn't go in.
No. Well, and so my funniest and favorite takeaway from that situation, I have two, is that he bragged to my mother that night about having met Sarah. And my mom was like, oh, I wish I had met her. So my mom was very sad that she didn't meet Sarah. But also my father, who like doesn't typically discuss our love lives, like his daughter's love lives with them, comes up to me out of nowhere, like of his own volition, and goes, if you're not dating Sarah, you really should be. And I was like, hot take from a father on my love life. And so that was another way that like my dad he's a very attentive father. Don't misconstrue what I'm saying, but like he's not comfortable talking about romance with his daughters. And so like he had never really talked about anybody I'd been dating before that. He had talked about the partners I had brought home and he liked them, but he never told me like, you might want to consider dating this person, let alone this woman I dragged into his house.
Looking like a bro.
So that was one of the ways that like I really knew that Sarah was a cut from a different cloth than anyone else I'd ever been with. And my family, we're like freakishly close. Like not even just my immediate family, my grandfathers and my grandfather and my aunts and my uncles, and like we're all very, very close. And so, one of the things I had always joked about was like, if my family doesn't approve of you, you gotta get going. And then you came to your first family function and you were like, oh my God, like you guys are so close.
It was so loud.
So loud. You can always tell when you're in a room full of my family. And then I brought you to Thanksgiving one year, and my cousin Michelle immediately after we had left texted me and was like, I like her, keep her. And so like my family was like weighing in quite a bit about her. And so I was like, you know what, I like her too. So I mean, you struck approval rates immediately. And my parents will still like out of nowhere be like, how's Sarah? What's Sarah doing? Do you think she wants to come over? Like, why don't you ask her? You've got her number.
Yeah, even that first, and I don't want to speak for them, but I think it's fair to say I have a great relationship with both your parents. And even that first Christmas, your mom was the Victrola that you have. That was a combined effort between your mom and I. And I mean, I don't think I'd probably talked to her a ton even before that point. And she said, hey, what do you think Amy would like for Christmas? And I helped her get this in like a good deal. And yeah, so even that first Christmas, we were pretty
sneaky peeps.
Yep.
So, and then I met your family kind of around the same time, maybe a little bit longer than that.
What was that first meeting? It wasn't as influential as meeting yours. It wasn't. You were not dressed like a bro.
I wasn't. I don't typically dress with a "Suns Out, Guns Out" shirt on.
I think you met Dad first, though. I don't remember.
I just remember we got along immediately, and I loved meeting your family because, like you said, it was nice to see. It was nice to meet the people who raised the person that you love. And it was nice to sort of see how they interact together. And, I walked out of your parents' house that day having individual plans with both of your parents. So I still have to teach your dad how to make pierogi at some point. And shortly after I met your parents, they were like, hey, you guys want to get some chickens and keep them in our coop? And so I was like, hi, nice to meet you for the second time. Here are the 16 chickens you've allowed me to choose. So I mean, we got along immediately, and I met your brother not shortly after that. Your brother, I remember we didn't know your brother was going to be hanging out, and so I made you bring me to TJ Maxx so I could get an eyeshadow palette and a different shirt and pair of pants because I was like, I cannot do this because I don't remember. I think I was I think we'd gone kayaking. So I wasn't in my finest wear. And
she was allowed to change.
I learned from past mistakes. But yeah, I mean, we got along really well. And your dad and I have our saying now where I say, hey to Dad, and he says, hey to Amy. And it's just, yeah. Our families haven't met yet, but your mom made a beautiful Christmas decoration for my mom. So it's on the horizon.
Definitely.
So next time I see a construction worker and they're not wearing a Suns Out, Guns Out shirt, I'm going to ask them why they're out of uniform. Since you said that that's the uniform.
I think we should get a t-shirt cannon and just roll up tank tops, and when we pass construction signs, we'll just be like, boom, 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 boom. And just send t-shirts over the fence.
Yeah. Except I wouldn't want to scare them is the issue.
That's fair. Yeah.
But yeah, I love that. And we had been together for well over a year before your mom met my parents.
Yeah.
So it takes time. And that's still, I think, the only time we've done that other than, of course, the wedding.
Yeah.
But even that, it was COVID. So we didn't even really hang out. So speaking of which, how would you say that kind of the goalposts and the way our relationship has gone differed than kind of what you see in the media?
I've never really thought about that. This is my first major long-term relationship, and I plan on it being my last.
Me too.
So I never had much of anything to compare it to. And I don't necessarily want to compare it to things because I I don't feel like I'm lacking anything, and I don't feel like I'm missing anything that like I've seen on TV or anything that like I don't know. Like TV romance has always felt sort of fake, and so I've never necessarily counted on it to be like, this is what I want my experience of love to be like. And I mean, I feel like the biggest thing that's different is that we actually like each other. Because I feel like a lot of sitcom families don't like each other. Like the parents are just miserable and constantly like not talking to each other and doing things behind each other's back. And then the other one finds out and gets really mad. And like it just feels
the old ball and chain stuff. Yeah.
Like, and I'm not miserable with you. I actually really enjoy our time together.
Yeah. Me too.
So if that's a difference, is a big one.
Yeah. I think like it's an important thing to touch on because like so much of what we see portrayed and what we've been taught is the fact for like a really long time, people who were really unhappy would stay in that relationship because it was a sure thing and it was a safe thing and they would settle.
Yeah.
And it's just good to remember that we don't have to settle and we can wait till we find the person that we fit with. Yeah. And that happened to be you for me. I would just say, for me, Sweet Cameron has had to deal with changing laws and different things that I've gone through because of my trans identity that aren't things that you really think about. And I'm not going to get too much into that. But like when we were talking about our dreams, right? And we both, one of the things that we're really, really close on is we both did the Disney college program and we both love Disney. And there was a time early on where you were talking about maybe seeing about going back and moving back to Florida. And I made it very clear that I supported you and I would wave you off at the airport, but that I would not move to Florida again because of some of the things I dealt with as a transgender man in my time there until the laws changed. Yeah. Like if the laws changed, that would be one thing. But where it stood right now, like when you finally have protections where you're at, you don't want to leave because you don't want to give that up. No. And so like, I remember having those conversations and truly like, it just wasn't something that had been thought of. And, you know, it's still something that if it is on the table, we will cross that bridge when we get there. But like, those are just an example of a difference that we had to think about.
Yeah. And I mean, Florida's off the table for a lot of reasons now.
Mostly mosquitoes.
What do you think? So for me personally, like the thing I like about being in a queer relationship is that like, there's not a cookie cutter sort of equation to follow because it's not represented often in media. So like we get to make our own narrative and people don't get to really be like, but why are you doing that? Because there's not that equation we're already held to. But yeah.
Yeah, we set our own standard. And I wanted to piggyback off of what Cam said with media and these families that don't like each other. And drama's not sustainable. So seeing relationships like that on TV, it's for the drama. And so if you look at that and you grow up watching that, like most of us have, and think that's how a relationship should be, that's a huge breakdown because it's not sustainable. Whereas a relationship where you're respecting each other and you actually enjoy each other's company and you talk about things, it's not as dramatic. So you're not going to have these massive blowout fights where you don't talk to each other for a week, but you're also going to have that relationship 5 years from now. So that's to me a big difference, and I'm really glad I'm on this side of it. Yeah. And kind of like what you said, like we get to pave our own path because this is all pretty new.
Mm-hmm.
And we talk about the order of things, and as far as like getting married, having kids, that kind of stuff. And well, I think we're going to get to this later, but one of our goals is to have a bed and breakfast in Vermont. And so also like, where does that fit in our timeline? And it's kind of fun because there are other factors that influence that, including like what you had talked about earlier with being raised Catholic and having some of that almost like pre-programmed in your mind of this is the path you're supposed to take, but we get to set our own. But then it's kind of like, okay, well, how do we do that? Because there's not many people ahead of us who have done it. So it's a little bit scary too.
Yeah. And, forging your own path can be kind of frightening, especially when people are sort of expecting you to follow the system set forth by like heteronormative relationships. But like, like we said, there's not a lot of representation in media that's healthy. I mean, we're seeing more representation. I wouldn't necessarily call it healthy, but we are seeing more representation. So like that's a thing that's coming up, which is great. And, we've got younger queer voices starting to make things, which is great. But there's a lot of, we've had to sort of sit with ourselves and be like, okay, so we know that we're spending forever together. And we know we want to get married, and we know we want to have children, but, we might be ready for children before we're ready for marriage for our own emotional reasons. And that's okay with us. And so the people who love us need to also be okay with that. So that's a discussion we've had a lot. Mm-hmm. But also as a side note, if you consider marriage to be the old ball and chain, like don't get married. Like marriage isn't a punishment. And so it's really important for us to make it clear to each other that we're getting married because we want to, not because we're expected to. And we've talked talked extensively about it, but like the old ball and chain shtick sets me, I just climb up the wall with it because for one thing, marriage isn't a punishment, but for another thing, like we don't get to make jokes about that because we haven't historically had that right in that option. And so when people are like, oh, we gotta go home to the old ball and chain, like they get divorced. I don't know what to tell you. Like you should ideally be happy in your relationship. And, there has not been a single day we've been together that I haven't been like, 3 hours and I'm home. You know what I mean? Like my end goal every single day is to come home to Sarah. So.
Yeah.
Especially in COVID times, right? I'm sure you two were quarantined together, right? At one point? Yeah, so were we. And like, we had no issues. We actually kind of loved being around each other and getting to hang out. And that was a really good indicator of like the health of the relationship that we didn't drive each other crazy. And the first time we were quarantined, it was in my tiny apartment. So if we didn't get mad then we're good. To be Mitch and talk about history, kind of like you touched on for a second too, something that I think ties into this is our generation doesn't have a lot of elders to show us the way. And even those that we do have, like Amy touched on, the laws to protect them weren't there and things were horribly different. And to survive, they had to act a different way than we have the privilege of being able to now. So we really will continue to reinvent the wheel, and the generation after us, I'm sure it will look different than it has for us. And hopefully that's progress we can continue to make. Let's see. Oh, speaking of fighting or disagreeing, what does a disagreement or a fight tend to look like with us?
Boring.
Yeah.
Like we've never gotten in a shouting match.
I don't yell. That's a boundary. We don't yell.
And like if something is really bothering us, we talk about it. Mm-hmm. And like we just talk it out. And there have been times where like we've noticed that we're both getting like too intense about something. So we just sort of walk away from it and come back to it when we're more level-headed. But like we've never like we were like arguing about where food should go or something. Mm-hmm. And you looked at me and you were like, is this our first fight?
Yeah. So we like have very limited covered space, and Cameron has her home baking license. And I like to bulk buy groceries because I was raised by people who did their own home canning and stuff like that. Like that's what I'm used to. And so sometimes we get a little tight on covered space, like we just do. Yeah. And I have the trait that I inherited that if I'm looking for something and I can't find it within like a minute, I get testy. And I know that's an issue with me, not an issue with you. And so I've become better at being like, I'm looking for this. Where did you last see it? And you let me know, and then I can usually find it. And then if I want said thing to be more accessible to me in the future, I will look at you and say, this is where I'm going to keep this. This is where it makes sense for me. Is that okay? You'll say yes. I'll be like, great. Now I know where it is. And so next time when I can't find it, it's completely my fault. And it's because I forget things all the time. But I mean, that's kind of it. Yeah. But how do we resolve those differences is that we talk about it. Yeah. We never let it just hang there. And we don't yell at each other about it.
No. And like, if we do have an issue, we talk about it. Like, I've never left anything unsaid because that just builds resentment. Mm-hmm. And resentment doesn't build a healthy relationship.
Yeah. And there are challenges. So like down the road, there are inevitably going to be things that happen that we disagree on. But we are a team.
Yeah.
And we will figure those things out together when they come.
Exactly.
Yeah, I definitely agree with Cam. Ours are pretty boring. But at least for me, it feels almost like our disagreements are two stages. So my communication style when I'm upset is to shut down and curl into a ball and just be stoic. And it's very hard to communicate with somebody like that. So if I'm upset about something or Amy's upset with me about something, the reaction, my initial reaction is the same. So kind of my role in that moment is to just like breathe through it basically and make sure that I'm hearing Amy and that I'm not saying something that I don't want to say or anything like that. So in that heated moment, it's more of what do we need to say to each other right now to kind of de-escalate this until we're in a clear headspace to actually talk it out. Because I'm the same way as what you said, Mitch, and I never yell. I don't like yelling. I don't want to be yelled at. Like yelling is just not part of our communication. So if I'll go back to the cupboard door thing because that tends to be what I do that
right in the corner of my head.
Yeah. And the problem is our cabinets are this exact height that if Amy walks in and hits her head on it, like, oh, of course she's going to be upset. So if I leave the cupboard door open again and she is now in like physical pain and she's also upset with me, we have to get through that part first. But once we do, so if you're at a 9 out of 10 of anger at each other, if you start yelling at each other, now you're at like a 15 out of 10. It's so much harder to come back down. So if we can like come down from that 9 and then get to a point where we can start talking to each other, then the real healing begins. And that's where we either say, I need to take 5 minutes and collect my thoughts. But it is never more than, I'd say, 10 minutes. Usually our 10 minutes is cleaning something. So it's really great because the house all of a sudden looks fantastic. And then we'll sit on the couch and we'll talk it out. But it's taken us a bit to realize what each other needs in that heightened state to then be able to pretty quickly come back and talk about it instead of, okay, well, we'll sleep on this and talk about it in the morning. Because at that point I have forgotten, which is great, because it means I've, let it go and everything, but that's not great for moving forward because I'm still going to leave the cupboard door open. So we need to make sure that we're talking about it while it's still important to us, but not while we're in a heightened state.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I value the most about our relationship, and I think I'm jumping the gun on a question here, but one of the things I value most is our communication style, because we work every single day at making sure we've got open and honest communication. And so it's a point of pride for me that we've never raised our voices at each other. I think we got into one argument that lasted longer than 10 minutes and we resolved it that day. And so, our fights, we can't even call them fights because they're not fights. They're disappointed discussions. It's like that same thing where you're like, I would so much rather you yell at me right now than be quietly disappointed. But the quiet disappointment is what really tips it for us, because we do value each other so much and we do value open, honest communication and vulnerability with each other. So, if we've slipped up, my immediate reaction is what can I do to fix this right now? One of the things that I had to learn in our communication styles is that I don't like to see people sad or suffering, so I'm a fixer. And sometimes Sarah doesn't need fixing or need advice. She just needs to feel her feelings and move on. And so, we've gotten into a couple discussions about that because you're like, I don't need you to fix things. I need you to just let me feel. And I'm like, I want to let you feel, but I also can't stand you hurting. And so I'm going to put my own feelings on you because you clearly don't want to be feeling this. And so that was a learning curve for us, but, we work really hard on talking about everything all the time. And so we've game planned for arguments that may someday in 80 years come up because we're like, okay, so if this comes up, how do you want to handle it? Because we don't like catching each other unawares. And because we do work every single day at our communication, it's really important to us that we don't argue and fight and raise our voices. And, going back to kids, we've already decided we don't want to raise our children witnessing our disagreements. And so in order to not fall into the trap of them witnessing our disagreements, that means we need to know how we're going to work through disagreements now. And
we've also come up with little codes for things. So sometimes when you're out with your friends and you don't want to, it's kind of embarrassing to say something like what we would say at home. If you're out with your friends and say, I can't even think of anything. A notch. Yeah, whatever it is, it's just something that if I do something that bothers Amy while we're out with our friends, it's embarrassing if she addresses that vocally in that moment. And it makes kind of the whole table feel awkward and stuff. And maybe that's an issue with society, but regardless, it's there. So we've come up with little codes that if one of us does something while we're in public, the other one is not a big fan of, or time to chill out kind of thing. We do these little codes, and that's worked so well, because that tended to be something, at least at the beginning of our relationship and past relationships for me, that you then get home and I'm like, I just had this great night. What did you think? And then your partner is like, I'm so mad at you. You're like, whoa, we were not on the same page about this. So that just makes sure that in the moment we're on the same page about it.
And those codes, we don't even just do those codes in public. So I am a chronic rule follower. And so if Sarah is speeding just a scooch too much for my comfort, I'll just scritch her knee for 2 seconds just to be like, hey, and she'll slow down. And that way when she's talking to me about something, I'm not put a pin in this for a second, you're going too fast. Instead, she can keep talking, but she knows that I'm scritching her leg, which means please slow down. So that's, we're super boring when we're upset with each other because we're just I didn't appreciate the way you said this. Can you try doing it again? And then the other person's like, oh, I'm so sorry. Here's what I understand you heard now. And here's what I was trying to say. And I'm like, okay. And that's it.
Yep.
I love the boring.
Yeah, it's better to be boring than explosive.
Yeah. we've had some of those exact same things. We don't have set codes, but that's a really good idea.
Yeah.
Like, I am a horrible passenger seat driver and navigator. I'm awful about it, especially like when someone takes a turn and I'm not expecting the car to turn and they turn really fast with anybody, I'm like, ugh! And I don't know where that comes from, but yeah, being mindful of it. Something that I would say I value most in our relationship is I didn't have to sacrifice a single piece of myself for this relationship to work. Like, we allow ourselves to be individual people who are teaming up their power for the greater good. And two, the other piece of that is like, we're committed to handling ourselves and to checking ourselves and to doing the work we need to do as individuals. Like, for myself, working through a lot of the trauma that I have from my past with my therapist as an individual and devoting myself to that healing for me, but also because it allows me to bring my best self to this relationship. It was really important, especially when we were first getting together, that when I was having these feelings from experiences that I had in the past, I wasn't projecting my trauma onto this new situation. And so that was the other side of that independent claim. But I mean, like, I get to be as goofy as I want, and I love it. And like,
I love it too.
I'm an adventurous eater. And so like, we figure it out so that like, I'm getting to try new foods, but we're also making food that you like too at the same time. And like, we don't sacrifice to be together.
Yeah.
We just make each other stronger. That's the thing that I think means the most to me.
Yeah. I think one of the things I value most is our friendship. Mm-hmm. So like, with those 8 dates that we went on, we became friends first, and then we like, it snowballed into like the romantic relationship. Like, I did sort of feel this not necessarily instantaneous connection, but like, there was a period where we weren't talking as much because you were helping your niece with something. You had a friend visit unexpectedly. Like, you were just being taken up with people you already had these like solid connections to, and you didn't have time to sort of talk to this random girl that you were talking to on the internet. And like, I get that. And like, but there was so much of me that was like, okay, but I'm willing to wait for as long as I need to keep talking to this guy, because like, I just felt like there was something there, and I'm glad that I waited and didn't listen to my mom and my best friend who were like, just start talking to other people and get over it. Like, yeah. But like, we have a friendship and we have our marriage and our relationship. Like, it's all like building blocks on things. Like, I feel like that is a common trope where like, people like get together because they were attracted to each other, and then they just end up like staying with each other because it's comfortable and it's whatever, but they don't really have these like common bonds that connect them, that like make them friends and also lovers or whatever. Like, it just doesn't, that's never made sense to me. And so I'm glad that we can still be like goofy and have all these like.
Mm-hmm. Well, and you're my best friend. Like, whenever anything happens, you're the first person I want to tell.
Yeah.
And like, we live together now, which is great. But like, we used to literally be on the phone in silence, just on the phone, doing our own independent things on the phone with each other, not talking, but just having the other person like on the line, just to be connected.
Yeah, when we couldn't actually like be together.
Yeah, and then one of us would see a funny meme and like would send it to the other, like, but we're always chilling.
Yeah.
And I love that. And we still do that.
Yes.
We still do that. I love that we can be independently doing our own thing, and then we look up and we blow kisses across the living room. Like, we don't have to be up in each other's business all the time.
Yeah.
But we stay connected. Yeah.
Exactly.
I love that, like, we look up and blow each other kisses, because, like, yeah, I mean, you have been in how many meetings with me, and how many times have you seen me mute and go, because I'm wooing Sarah as she walks by, like, wearing her snowsuit, like, you know, it's, I personally, the thing that I value the most about our relationship is the fact that, like, we're fairly similar in a lot of ways, but there are some ways in which we are very different. And we don't shame each other for that.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, I mean, right. And like, you could give me 2 + 2 and I'd be like, I don't know how to do this. But like, Sarah is a master with numbers. We were working on a project at my parents' house at one point, and she was like, can you figure out what like 2/16 of this decimal is? And I was like, I know you're not asking me right now. And then she asked me how to she asked me if I would help figure out an angle. And I was like, she was explaining to me how to do it. And you know, in Charlie Brown, where they're like, wah, 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 like, I shorted out, and she was just like staring at me, and I was just staring blankly at her. I was like, I see your mouth moving. I don't know if I heard a single sound that just came out of your mouth. So like, she's really like, she doesn't make me feel stupid for shorting out when numbers come up. And you know, you're really into like the stocks and science and stuff like that. And so especially like lately, you've been telling me all about like things that are changing and like all these different trends and whatever. And I've been like, okay, I don't know what that means. Explain that to me. And so like, I've been sending you articles I found, and you'll be like, that was a great article. And I was like, great, I didn't read it. But you know, it's a way I can validate you. And in the same way, like, you know, I'm kind of a dweeb. Like, I'm 800 years old. I pen pal. We just bought Bunko to play. Like, you know, I have a lot of not 28-year-old hobbies. And so, you know, you validate that. You don't like make me feel stupid for having like hobbies that aren't necessarily in line with someone my age. And, you know, you don't know anything about Animal Crossing, but you let me tell you about my favorite villager who moved in. And, you know, like, we have these different interests, but we really embrace that about each other, because like, where my skill set is maybe not as strong is where you fill in, and vice versa. And so together, I think that makes like a really cohesive unit.
I agree. And I think we take it a step further than that even. So I will never be this avid Animal Crosser is that a word, Animal Crosser?
It is now.
It is now.
DM it.
And Amy will talk to me about what her favorite characters that just moved in on the island, and it's not just a conversation of, oh cool, Maple moved on your island. I don't actually care, but I'm gonna pretend I do because you do. It's that step further of, oh, like, how long do you think it'll take to get Maple's picture? And so I've learned along the way the things that are important. And
I'm so proud of you for remembering her name.
But it's about more than just letting your partner talk to you about their favorite things. It's engaging back. So, I mean, every time you send me an article about a stock I'm super interested in, or when I tell you about a new construction tool I bought, and you then remember that and turn it around and say, oh, well, you can do this with that tool or something. You've learned something about it. I fall in love with you again every single time, because you've actually taken an interest in something I'm interested in, but also I still have my own autonomy, and you are never going to go to Lowe's on your own to look at what cool new drills they have. It's just not you.
But you also like are really cool about me being like, okay, so we can go to Lowe's, but if we're going to spend 8 hours looking at the difference between a quarter drill and a 2/4 or the half drill, whatever you want to call them, we're going to spend 10 minutes looking at lamps and planning our future bathroom because I want to look at a crystal chandelier. I don't care about a jigsaw. And so like we do that, but
Yeah.
I think also like growing together has allowed us to see how freaking weird we are. And there are times where we're like, oh my God, thank God nobody else is witnessing this right now because they think that we're losing it. And so like sometimes we'll joke about like the FBI having tapped our phones. And so, every once in a while we'll pretend we're the FBI person being like, ma'am, please, they're talking about their dog dancing again. I can't do this anymore because we're like so weird, but like we let each other be weird.
Yeah.
And I think that we like give each other a good outlet. Like I'm a sundowner, and so you let me be my weirdest at 9:30 at night when you're like, I just want to go to bed.
Yeah.
But like you don't make me feel badly about being hyper at 9:30 at night. It's like, okay, I'm gonna lay down, and that's fine. Just be a little quieter. Like it's okay.
Yeah. Yeah, and on that kind of call and response thing we were talking about earlier, help me out with this, with that video that we watched that was talking about when you say something to your partner and
So I don't know how many people know this, but I also run an accountability class for men who have been arrested for domestic violence. And last week we watched a video by his name is John Gottman. And he does great research for relationships, and it was called bidding and rebidding.
Yeah.
So bidding is saying something like, oh, look it outside, there's a boat passing in the water and it's beautiful. And then your partner either engages with you or barely engages with you or fully engages. And so typically in relationships, people will bid to try and get engagement. And if they don't get the engagement they're looking for, it's called rebidding. And a lot of times in relationships, people don't rebid because they're like, well, I didn't get the response and now I'm irritated that my partner didn't answer me. And so something that we work on a lot, and now we've got a word for it because I did the research because I'm a social worker, is now we know that like we've never had a problem rebidding because if I say something and you don't respond the right way, like we have got a lot of call and responses that we do. And if she doesn't respond the way I call, I'm like, excuse me, and I'll repeat it. And she'll be like, oh, sorry. And she'll do it because she maybe just like wasn't paying attention or like got distracted.
We found out through this video like how important that is, even though it's something silly and goofy that we do. And it was a feel-good thing for us because it was just a way, if, Amy's sitting on their couch doing work and one of us initiates the call and response, and the other response is just like hey, I'm still here. But then also after watching that video was like, oh wow, this is actually really important with like kind of more underground communication with each other.
Yeah. So yeah.
That's
I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because we definitely do that. 9 times out of 10, I like send a text and then I'm like, did you see that thing I sent you? And I think that's the form that takes most often in our relationship. We were cracking up because last night I just hit real goofy hours at about 9:45 p.m. and I had the giggles so bad and I couldn't get it under control. And she was so patient, like, okay, go to sleep now. What would you say is like our biggest area of focus in our relationship? Or our biggest goal?
I mean, I feel like it's just making sure that the other one is comfortable and feels supported to like reach our individual goals, and like sort of making the other person's goal part of your personal goals, like to just help each other get where they want to be and be like as supportive as like you are able to be. in some ways. Like you can't take it all onto your plate from theirs to help them achieve it, but like you can be supportive and there for them. And
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, that's almost exactly what I was going to say. One of the things that came into this relationship is Cameron's incredible talent. And one day she will have her own bakery. And I literally cannot wait to work behind the counter and get to be that guy, like, and also to decorate it because, I'm going to go a little bit nuts. I would say that something too is like for our goals and our visions to change, but with love and support no matter what, right? So like I had really lofty goals for myself of things that I really wanted to accomplish. And then sometimes when you peruse your like childhood dreams, it doesn't turn out the way you wanted it to, or you get there and you realize that it wasn't what you needed, it wasn't what you thought you wanted. And when you came into my life, I was really down on myself, like big time, and figuring out kind of what my next right thing was. And you were that person who really made it clear to me that the opposite of good is perfect. And I didn't have to do exactly what I had always hoped I would do to have a happy, good life. And I'm thrilled to be in a place now where I'm building that happy, good life and I get to build it with you. And so that continuing to like fortify and to strengthen and to grow together, I think is the biggest thing for me.
Yeah. And like I remember just recently you went and took some classes to try and get into grad school. And like just to have those credits to be able to apply. And I was there supporting you and rolling with the punches when you got overwhelmed with the
not literal punches.
Rolling with the very metaphorical punches. He was just getting very frustrated because a lot of it too was like psychology and like kind of outdated information that he's very intimately like
acquainted with.
Yes.
Yeah.
And knowledgeable of. And so like feeling like he needed to teach the teachers to make the classes better. And like I was there sort of just to be like a sounding board while you were having those frustrations with your classes and then just sort of being like, it's okay, it doesn't matter. And then like also being there when you were disappointed in yourself a little bit, like realizing that grad school wasn't for you right now, even though it's something that you thought you wanted, like you can always revisit it later, but you're focused on your job right now more than your education, and that's taking up enough of your time. And like just being there to get you out of that like negative self-talk. And
it's life is a process in so many ways, and I think everybody deserves to have a true partner in navigating that. Like me with someday grad school, Cameron with someday bakery, we balance each other out, we help each other. And, we also have times like this where it's natural. So winter is a season that shows us that things need to rest and things can't be in bloom all the time. That's just not how it works. These periods of rest and healing and regrowth are really important. But a partnership should be a partnership for all of the seasons of your life, not just when things are going exactly according to plan. And I'm really glad that that's what we have.
Yeah. What would you say our biggest area of focus is? Or our goals?
Well, area of focus, I think, like long term for us is we focus a lot on being each other's advocates, or being each other's best advocates. So somewhere along the way, whether it be a TED Talk or someone just told me or something, I had heard about the idea that, so if we're both our own puzzles with our own puzzle pieces, it's not about just making sure that one of my pieces fits into Amy's puzzle and one of Amy's fits into mine. It's creating a new puzzle together. And I think that stuck with me and definitely influences the way we do things moving forward, because there's been a ton of times when, whether it be promoting your book or you promoting my business or whatever it is, we know without a doubt that if somebody mentions ever wanting to read a book ever, or ever wanting to live in a house at some point in their life, like we got each other. And that's huge. And I don't know if that's necessarily the norm. There's a friend of mine who posts on, she's in the same industry as I am, and then her husband owns a contracting business. And anytime somebody says something about needing that specific contractor, she's on it. So she floods posts with, oh, that's my husband's company actually does that. Give him a call. Oh, give this person a call. He'll help you out all the time. And I've heard a couple people mention, man, I'm really sick of seeing that. And my thought is like, I respect the crap out of that, because she is very successful and has her own stuff she has going on, but is seen all the time promoting him. And I love it. I think it's great. And it kind of saddens me a little that not everybody sees it that way and are like, oh man, I'm really sick of seeing this. You're sick of seeing their healthy relationship? Why?
Yeah. I think too, one of the things I value the most is, again, like, I think advocating for each other is huge. And, you know, there are a lot of ways that you've helped me really come into my own. And, you know, I know that my parents have sort of spoken with you about how glad they are to see me flourishing in a different way than they've ever seen me flourish before, because that wasn't how things shook out before. And it wouldn't happen if it weren't for the fact that, like, you and I work really hard at constantly calling each other on instead of calling each other out. Mm-hmm. And we are very much like, I mean, you've seen how before I'd be like, no, I don't want to bother with that because it might not work out. And now I'm like, I don't know, let's try it. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But like, that's very new for me. I'm very much like I would rather not try at all than try and fail publicly. But, you know, you've made me really, really comfortable with the like more uncomfortable parts of myself. And I really value that about our relationship, especially because like we do have some very lofty goals and we're not going to achieve them if I'm still like, no, I don't want to try it. You know, if we move to Vermont and a bed and breakfast doesn't work out, then we're still in Vermont. Like, you know what I mean? And so that's something that I really appreciate about you, especially, is because like you're very strong, but you're strong in a way that I haven't historically been strong, but I'm learning. And so I like that a lot. Yeah.
Awesome. So our last question for the two of us is, how did deciding to get married go for us? And then were there differences from, again, like those societal expectations and how we approached getting married?
Yeah. So our marriage was very outside of even necessarily what like I dreamed of as like a little kid, like the big, like fancy gown, like the whole like big ballroom, like huge party kind of thing. It happened during COVID, so it had to be different from then. But even since then, like it wasn't what I had dreamed of, but it was everything that I wanted still. Like, because it was marrying the love of my life and having the people who were the most important to me there. But it was also like, it was definitely a product of the time. Mm-hmm. It was just a very tiny, socially distanced thing. And it was just a ceremony. We have a reception planned
Someday.
Someday in a couple of years. And it was also a little bit born out of you had gotten pretty sick, and it was just a sort of fear of like everything is so uncertain right now, and if something were to have happened, like just bureaucracy wise, it was better for us to be married. And like we knew it was coming down the pike anyway. Like we
got engaged right before COVID hit.
Yeah.
We had gone to Disney World in the beginning of March 2020 to get engaged, which we'd talked about and like made that decision. And then the entire reality we were living in was different a week later.
Yes. It was like a huge culture shock, kind of. And so like it was an inevitability that we were going to get married anyway. And like we had been planning it and we were planning on it to be this year. But like logistically speaking, it just sort of made sense for us to move it up a year.
Yeah. And so we did have to navigate issues with documentation. Like I discovered that my name change hadn't been put on my birth certificate. So I had to get a hold of a new birth certificate so that I could have my real name on my marriage license, which is kind of important.
Yeah.
And luckily I had Amy with me to advocate through that as well. So, I mean, that was a difference. And in a lot of ways, I had a lot of fear finding an officiant who could perform the ceremony, who was going to be respectful of our very queer, very non-traditional relationship was a high priority for me. And through our connections, because of Pride and participating in Pride, we found Brenda, and she was amazing and she was wonderful. Incredible. And from the first moment I spoke to her, that anxiety that I'd had that I was going to be disrespected on my freaking wedding day disappeared.
Shout
it disappeared.
Out to Blue Kryptonite.
Yeah, it was awesome.
She's amazing.
And, you know, a close friend, Kathy Collins, did our pictures, and someone I felt really safe with. I was able to have my suit custom made.
Yeah.
And a dear friend of mine actually did the measurements for that, so I didn't have to go through the uncomfortability of like going to see a tailor and then being surprised when my measurements are a little bit different than the people they normally suit. So we found ways to really like have our community, our queer community that we loved and had been a part of, kind of like bolstered us in that. And our families were super supportive and super helpful as well in just that little celebration. And yeah, it's definitely not the end. Like we still want that big party someday, but it's really nice being married so far.
Yeah. And it's nice to just know that like, while the decision to get married when we did was sort of out of a fear of the unknown a little bit, like we knew that we were going to get married at some point, and like I don't like regret it at all. And I'm so happy to be with someone who loves and respects me.
Yeah. And so, you know, it's just the start of the next chapter for us.
Neat. So we're not married yet, but we talk about it all the time. So how would you say like it's been different for us navigating it, just given, you know, our own histories and the different ways we've discussed how things unfolding are important to us?
So I guess I want to say that all our conversations up until just recently have been talking about it, whereas now it feels like it's more planning about it. And I'm not sure what exactly it was that made that switch, but all of the conversations kind of stem from us being at different places about our feelings with marriage. And I think that because we're coming to the table feeling differently about it, it takes a lot of communication to make sure that we are both, when we actually go to get married, we're both in the same place with it. And that's tough because it takes compromise to be getting to that same spot. But this is also one of those things that you don't want to compromise yourself for. This has to be completely a decision that you're making together and for all the right reasons and everything. And I think it's, back to our communication that has gotten us to this planning for instead of talking about phase, to make sure that neither of us feel like we're compromising ourselves, but also we're continuing that always, steady forward movement in our relationship.
Yeah. And, we crack jokes about like getting gay married and things all the time. But, one of the things is like, when I am joking about it, every once in a while, I will check in to make sure that like, that I'm just joking, because I don't want you to feel like you're being pressured. And, we can't be carrying the torch of respect in our relationship if we're respecting everything but this one thing because I want it. And, that's really important across the board of like, even in the simpler things, like you like being outside in the snow, and I am more than content to watch the snow fall with a mug of tea from the inside. And so like, even that, you'll be like, I'd really like to be outside. And I'm like, I don't want to go snowshoeing. Why don't we go sledding? Because that's like a compromise I'm willing to make. But, we don't ever pressure each other into making decisions, and marriage is no different. In fact, I personally feel that you should be more cognizant of the way you're approaching marriage, because it is something that we know is our ultimate end goal. And like, if we have children before we get married, like that's our decision, because at the end of the day, like the people around us don't need to know why that's been our decision. They just need to continue to love us the way that they love us. And so it's okay to fall outside of the standard trajectory that people often go down. And, you're not in a bad relationship for identifying those boundaries. And, we've had a lot of discussions about children, and, we've already got our children named. So like, it's not a question of having children. And like, it's not even the like, I don't know, I like this name. It's the like, we've chosen these names because these are family names, and these are, these are why these names are important to us. So like, we already have our children named.
We even brought my dad into it.
We brought your father into it. Like, your father helped us make a name. So like, it's not a question of if, it's a question of when. And so, we've explored different means of achieving our goals, and we've talked about, maybe children will come after marriage, who knows? Or, maybe we are ready for children and we want to move before our children hit school age. So if we have children in the next year, we'll be moving to Vermont in the next 4 years. So, there's a lot of discussion about that. And I think that that's really healthy to be able to have these talks, and for us to make sure we're checking in with each other to be like, how are you feeling now that we've, looked at like what kind of rings we might want, or, how are you feeling about this now? And it's okay that there are some days where you're like, I'm not really ready to talk about it, or I'm feeling really good about it, but I'm still not ready to make a decision about when I'll be ready. And just letting each other know that like we respect that process, and I will never pressure you into something, and you would never pressure me into something. And like, at the end of the day, the entire reason our relationship is as healthy as it is because we do respect each other so much, and we do discuss everything down to like, do you think that this breadcrumb should be an inch to the left? Like, we talk about everything. And I think that that's the difference between our relationship and a lot of other people that might run into some issues.
Yeah, I think you're right on with the constantly checking in with each other too, because these are huge life decisions and need to be treated that way. And they even like with getting married, we'll be following a certain trajectory, and then all of a sudden something happens because we're human, and our feelings will change temporarily. But for me, just recently, something happened with one of our friends, and I got scared, and it kind of mentally sent me back a little bit on our conversations about marriage. And I realized at that point that I needed to be checking in more with Amy about her thoughts on it, because my thoughts are having a pretty direct impact on her thoughts and her life. So at that point, I was like, oh, wow, I haven't asked you in a while. How are you feeling about this? Like, I'm making sure that I am treating you with respect on the decision too, not just running forward with, this is how I feel about it, and I'm not ready to compromise. Like, well, that's not how this works. Mm-hmm. You got feelings and thoughts and things that you want your way too, and it has to be an equal compromise.
Yeah. Yeah.
I really totally get that, because if I were to rewind a little bit to us getting engaged, mind you, pre-COVID, pre-anything, we had this fear of what the future might look like. Yeah. Even. I had made a very strong decision that I was not going to be engaged again unless I was proposed to before I got into this relationship. And through my own therapy and my own healing from the time of my life that had led me to that like iron curtain, it was something that I worked through and that I was getting through. But Cameron still proposed to me because she knew that I felt that way and that was important to me, to have us choose each other, not just one person making the decision. And when we were getting engaged, like I said, we knew it was coming. We didn't know how it was coming. Like, we kept the like how a surprise, but it wasn't like, you said it best when you said, I don't think that you should surprise someone with a life choice. Yeah. And like, that respect for my boundaries was a really good indicator that we were headed in the right direction. So thank both of you for joining us for this very long, very wonderful Queer and Teen video. This was so awesome, and I'm really glad that we made it happen.
Yeah, and if there's ever any question of whether you're in a healthy relationship or you have some concerns that things aren't going the way that you wanted them to, always feel free to reach out to me and Mitch, to our agency at large. There's always help out there. There's always options out there. And there's a lot of education out there. So if you just want some more information about, like, how do I communicate better with my partner? That's something that Mitch and I can do. And especially in queer relationships, there's a lot of, I don't want to say that there's a lack of education necessarily, but relationships do look different when you're in a queer relationship. And, just know that Mitch and I are here for you. There are hotlines if you need them. Our agency at large is here for you. And relationships can be tricky and murky and complex, and so is humanity. And it's okay to have questions. It's okay to need education. And we're here for you.
Yeah, so stay warm, and we will see you soon.
Bye.
Bye. And now Mitch finds out how to stop the recording. There we go.